Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ben Saunders. I'm the co-founder of WeBuild-AI. Today, we are here to discuss the technical, challenging conundrums of everything from balancing governance with innovation in the world of AI. It's such a fast-moving world at this moment in time when we talk about the disruptive opportunities that are afforded to us through agents, generative AI, large language models, and everything in between. And that disruption is both positive and it can also be deemed to be negative depending on which side of the fence you sit on. For today's session, I'm joined by two esteemed panelists in the form of Adrian Pinder and Ahmed Rafat. Adrian, if I could get you to do a quick intro for yourself first, please, and then I'll hand over to Ahmed accordingly.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Hello, everybody. My name is Adrian Pinder. I'm head of digital and data at DS Smith. You may not have heard of us. DS Smith is a major manufacturer of sustainable packaging solutions, 30,000 people, 350 factories around Europe, and now a sort of proud member of the International Paper Group, headquartered in the US. So that's me. Nice to meet you, Ben.
Perfect. Thanks very much for joining us today, Adrian. And Ahmed, if I could hand over to yourself, please.
Sure. Morning, everyone, and thanks, Ben, for having us today. My name is Ahmed Rafat. I lead the machine learning specialist solution architect on AWS. Been with AWS for almost 8 years now. So my team mainly engaging with AWS customers to address the business problem and see how machine learning can help them to address that, from ideation, taking to production. And yeah, delighted also to be here with DS Smith. So DS Smith is not only a customer for us, but also a partner. And also we are a customer for them as an Amazon, right? So it's a very interesting to be always talking to DS Smith. So yeah, delighted to be here.
Superb. Thank you both. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and very grateful for you to take part into today's session. But we've got so much to get through. And when we think about the world of AI, and we think about innovation does come with inherent risks, particularly if you move incredibly quickly. It's always important to consider what is the worst that could happen. What could be the potential harm to customers, to us as a business, and to the wider market when we think about innovation, not just in isolation in respect of AI, but any type of digital innovation. Because if innovation does go wrong, there are consequences. But when we start to think about the paradox of innovation and governance and regulation, sometimes we have to find that fine balance. And that fine balance in an enterprise context can be a really, really difficult thing to comprehend and also to achieve, particularly when you have complex technology estates, potentially slightly differing views and around strategic objectives at different layers of the organization. And then you might have competing agendas from a cross-border jurisdictional perspective when you are particularly a global enterprise, such as the case was in Adrian's introduction at DS Smith as well. So when you start to think about that innovation paradox and how we'd like to balance speed, agility with everything that we need from rigor and control, there's a whole heap of stuff that you need to consider. And we've got such a packed agenda today that we're going to try and squeeze that all into the 45 minutes or so that we have before us. But the current landscape from a regulatory perspective, particularly in the realm of AI, is changing before our feet. Day by day, week by week, month by month. And there are various jurisdictional regulations that we need to be mindful of on a global scale. There are regional regulatory requirements, and then there are industry regulatory requirements that we need to think about. And when you look at that from a global perspective, that is really, really difficult for enterprise organizations to comprehend. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. Earlier this year, we started to publish a realm of thought leadership around the art of AI governance and being able to move at speed whilst maintaining compliance. And we'll share some of our reflections that were published as part of that litany of thought leadership and the 4 pillars that we see as critical cornerstones to the need to balance AI governance in an enterprise context. We'll then take a moment's breath from myself presenting, and I'll be able to pose loads of questions to Ahmed and Adrian and put them on the spot. Where we'll go into a discussion panel to garner their experiences from real world in the trenches expertise that we hope will be super powerful for you all as a takeaway from today's session. And then as we move through the conversation, that will start to bring to life the frameworks, the approaches, and the methods that you can use to drive experimentation in your business in a safe and secure way with AI. And for those of you who don't know much about us as a business, though, we were launched in 2024. We are positioning ourselves as a team of AI native solutions builders. So we try to work very differently from other consultancies. We're very much outcome focused. Much like AWS, we work backwards from the outcome that you are trying to achieve. But we bring together a number of consulting accelerators, both from a method perspective with our Pathfinder methodology, and also our AI Launchpad pathway, which is essentially a cloud native, AI native proposition that sits on AWS to support organizations of all sizes to safely and securely adopt generative AI at scale. And we've proven time and time again now with enterprise organizations of various sizes around how we can 10x value creation in their businesses with digital data and AI. And one of the key things we really focus on is helping organizations move from POC purgatory into production grade AI in a safe, secure, and expedited manner. But enough about us. Let's start to talk about the current landscape. And when we think about AI, I mentioned a moment or two ago about the global dispersion of AI regulations. A little over 18 months ago to 2 years ago, the EU were fast out of the gates to position themselves as potentially one of the early trailblazers to put in place a fairly rigorous, I think it's fair to say, set of regulations for organizations to adhere to. And that was under the guise of the EU AI Act. More latterly, here closer to shores in the UK, we have started to make significant investments in bringing industry bodies across sectors together. You may recall that there was some public editorials a number of months back, circa 18 months back, when we had a different government, where there was an event held in Bletchley with various motivations to centre the UK as a hotbed for AI tech, but also ensuring that it was a home for ethical, safe AI. But when we look broader on a much more global basis, you'll probably see that in the US, there's a slightly differing view to how AI is regulated. It's very much focused on the territorial dispersions of the US. So you'll tend to see that state to state has slightly more stringent AI regulations. So Colorado, as an example, is very, very kind of focused on making sure that it protects its citizens, its businesses, and its rights from an AI and data sensitivity and data protection perspective. California, so similarly so, introduced a state privacy act a number of years back, although that has become somewhat more lenient in recent times as a proxy to everything that happens in that part of the world around Silicon Valley. But there are some key things to be really mindful of, irrespective of where you sit in the world, and some upcoming milestones that every business really needs to be aware of. In 2026, the EU AI Act will really start to become front and center for enterprise organizations and a key consideration for them when they look at their annual compliance posture. So by the end of August 2026, organizations need to have identified the various high-risk system requirements that exist across their critical business processes, where AI is used both within their business, where it is consumed within third-party systems, and they will need to identify the potential risks and harms associated to those systems, whilst also having in place the requisite mitigation strategies to ensure that if a AI system behaves erroneously, it causes some form of disruption to the business, your customers, and the wider market, that the right treatment strategies and the responses are in place to alleviate those challenges in an expedited manner. And the super important part of that is to ensure that there are controls are in place to drive visibility, transparency, and most importantly, explainability about what the likely cause of said disruptions were triggered by. Similarly, so here in the UK, there is a potential AI bill that is currently under consideration. That's going through the Commons, as I believe at this moment in time, with lots of focus around how we should govern AI safely here in the United Kingdom, but also what that would mean locally for us as a territory, and how that would then incision itself into the EU AI Act as well. And more broadly, when you start to think about these regulations, regulation is put in place to ensure that we do things in a controlled manner. There are instances where people don't necessarily do that, that controlled administration. And there are examples where the EU AI Act is now looking at organizations who do not conform to those regulatory obligations, potentially being fined up to 7% of their global annual turnover. So a very, very similar figure to the figures that are tied to the GDPR legislation and regulation as an example. So organizations are going to need to take this very, very seriously as we move forward into 2026 and beyond. But when we think about governance and whether we manage that in a proportionate way or if we overgovern, that brings significant challenges. As I mentioned a second or two ago, if we don't put the right controls and the right mitigations in place, organizations are exposing themselves to potential reputational damage and or regulatory penalties which come with significant monetary expenditure associated to them. But when we think about the innovation paradox and overgovernance and what that can potentially do to businesses, it may reduce our competitive edge and it may indeed suffocate innovation before we actually get opportunities and ideas off the ground. So when you think about that innovation paradox, what is the fine balancing act and what are the control mechanisms you can put in place to move at speed, deliver value to the business, but do that in a safe and secure way? And typically we think about 4 pillars around making sure that we can balance that innovation paradox. And I think proportionate governance, first and foremost, is the right thing for us to talk about. I think for many, many years, there has been an obsession of a one-size-fits-all approach to risk management. And risk is proportionate. Risk can be something that causes you disruption internally. It could cause disruption to your business internally and externally, and it could be a risk that is proportionate to certain segments of your business and or your customers. And in each of those examples, risk is multifaceted in terms of the technology system that you are consuming and interacting with, and the data that is housed within that system in terms of the sensitivity and the classification of that data based on the nature of your business. And as a consequence, when you start to think about that proportionate governance, those items of what is the data, what is the business process, and what is the criticality of that system to my organization are all really, really important considerations to take on board when you think about the proportionate governance. The second piece that I really wanted to think about here as well and really promote is the notion of embedded compliance. More often than not, compliance is something that we always think about at the start of a project. Rather at the end of a project, I should say. It's the afterthought that we don't really think about when we start the inception of an innovation initiative. And very often we get to the last final furlongs of a project delivery, and then we find ourselves in a position where we're trying to force things through because people haven't completed various tick sheets. They haven't gone through the required boards and governance processes. By embedding compliance into our innovation life cycles, both with data, digital, and AI much earlier, whether that's by bringing representatives of the compliance functions into our stand-ups, whether that is being able to use codified solutions to provide evidence of said compliance earlier in our software delivery life cycle, and whether that is a mechanism of us being able to use automated controls and or self-describing documentation to promote that back to our various stakeholders. That is a way in which we can rethink how we embed compliance into our innovation life cycles, but also federate that information into a self-service and consumable way so that we can provide the right information to the right people when it matters most. Thirdly, what we need to start to think about is for many, many years, lots of us in organizations of all sizes have been making a journey to the public cloud. And we know that public cloud provides us an opportunity to spin up, spin down, explore, build new capabilities that we probably wouldn't have been able to build previously within minutes. And this notion of having a set of core common building blocks and approved blueprints that essentially enable parts of your organization to instantiate innovation sandboxes in a safe, secure, cost-effective, and reliable way, with all of the audit trails and all of the explainability of who is doing what, why they are doing it, and most importantly, when they are doing it, can provide you with all of the data and timestamps and evidence to prove how you have moved from an early stage concept into a working solution in production. And there are examples at this moment in time where you might be looking at how you embed AI in your software development processes, and you can use approaches like spec-driven development to help you write self-describing documentation as you build the solution, so that every design decision you make is documented, is auditable, and can be pushed to other teams for rapid validation and approval of the work that you've done. And I think when you start to think about proportionate governance, embedded compliance, and that innovation sandbox approach, we then start to think about the operating model that brings all of those things together. And that's where we then start to think about cross-functional organizations. And dare I say, we've previously spoken of the two pizza team. We might even be moving to a world in the future where we talk about the two slice pizza team. And because we are looking at the ways in which we can build multidisciplinary teams and t-shirt shaped SMEs in the business who are multifaceted in their skill sets. By having those cross-functional capabilities much earlier in the innovation cycle, it means that we can drive unified decision-making much earlier. And it also enables us to ensure that we've got everybody aligned on the various initiatives. And I think the important thing for us to talk about here is that there is not a silver bullet to ensure that we can drive this in a successful way. But cherry picking the items that work across these four domains and embedding them into your own innovation lifecycle is the thing that will derive the most value for your business moving forward. The thing that I just wanted to touch on here as well is that when we think about the constituent building blocks that I've alluded to, your business has a diverse set of expertise. It has a diverse set of knowledge, and it has a diverse set of people who ultimately represent different perspectives across society. And I think one of the key learnings I've taken away from the last 12 to 18 months is that when you start to put in place this AI innovation and governance framework, it's important to make sure that you pull on those diverse expertise and people from across your business. Because when we think about ethics and we think about the avoidance of bias, it's important to ensure that we have different people at different levels of the organization embedded into the fabric and the DNA of how those frameworks are created. So that's enough from me for now. We're now going to change gears a little bit, and it's my turn to ask the questions and for Adrian and Ahmed to demonstrate their knowledge bombs across this domain. And Adrian, I was hoping to start with yourself in the first instance. We've worked together many years ago, and the world has changed significantly on those initial AI experiments and prototypes that you were building many moons ago. But when you start to think about the AI deployments that you've taken into DS Smith, what were the biggest governance concerns initially that came up internally for you as a stakeholder?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks for that, Ben. So yeah, we started looking at this about 2 years ago when we began our AI and Gen AI journey, and we realized, I think, pretty early on that if we were going to do it quickly and if we're going to do it at scale, we had to get the right sort of framework in place right at the start in order to help us go faster. And so we pulled together a group of people from across the business, right? Risk, IT, data protection, IT security, actually people from the works councils, to say, how are we going to put in place the right framework and the right guidelines for DS Smith? And what that allowed us to do was really get on the table all of the different concerns that people had, right? And it really covers, because AI is so fundamental, it covers such a wide range of concerns, right? So you have everything from data protection and privacy, intellectual property, how will we protect both our intellectual property and intellectual property that was sort of coming from third parties. Um, Security vulnerabilities. Is this going to put more vulnerabilities into the network and leave us open to more kind of incidents? How do we keep compliant with evolving kind of regulations? How do we keep an audit check of the decisions that it's coming up with? So a whole raft of issues from across the business that we have to kind of work through, I'd say.
I'm going to bring myself off mute. So I think there's a lot of the things that you were saying kind of had some synergy with the initial pros of the presentation. So I'm glad that we're on sync in that respect. Ahmed, I just wanted to kind of build on what Adrian was looking at there. So you obviously have the fortitude of having worked with DS Smith and a whole heap of other customers based on your role at AWS. Yeah. But when you talk to customers and you kind of dig into things like data residency, model transparency, audit trails, and all of that explainability, obviously services like Bedrock help in those kind of regulatory requirements. Could you maybe just talk me through what Bedrock and what AWS has at its disposal to help from a technology standpoint to also complement the points that Adrian was alluding to, please?
Yeah, so maybe we can take a step back first before talking about Bedrock, and we talk about data residency, because this is quite really important when you start to build on top of this data with Gen AI. So AWS is available in 38 regions globally, and around, if I'm not wrong, now we have 30 regions globally have Bedrock functional that you can use it. So you can use the top leading models locally within your country, between here in UK, and Europe, and Africa, and Middle East, is all having Bedrock inside it. So this is a top in our mind, and we keep expanding globally to address this challenge in terms of data sovereignty and data residency. For our audience, if you're not aware about Bedrock, so Bedrock is our platform that allow you to not only get access to the top leading models available on the market from that we are provided AWS, what you get from Anthropic, and even what you get from OpenAI, but also it's allow you to address many of what we discuss about it today is how I can productionize generative AI. Because if you think about it, model is important, but it's not everything when you build generative AI, right? You need to think about where is my data, how I can apply guardrails, how I can secure it, how I can monitor this, how I can actually apply guardrails. So even if I trust the model, I need to apply my own rules around it. And this is all set as in a component within Bedrock to help you to move quickly from just an idea to a production.
I think that's great, and I think from a guardrails perspective, there's always the out of the box configurations that you can get from Bedrock, and then the ability to tailor further guardrails based on your risk posture and the risk appetite of the business. So I think that's a fantastic capability within Bedrock itself. The common misnomer with all of this stuff, and Adrian, if I could come to yourself, is where do you start, right? And people often have a million use cases that are tucked away in a spreadsheet, and they're really interested in tackling any opportunity that they could potentially get their hands on. And those use cases carry risk. And when you started your experimentation was one thing, but I was just really curious, like, how did you start to build your AI risk governance framework, and what were the initial steps you took in that, guys?
Yeah, so I think we, in hindsight, we got a few things right, and it was definitely more by kind of luck than judgment. The first thing I think we got right was we did it super early, even before we put any fingers on keyboards and started kind of building anything. We said, let's get the framework in place to allow us to then even be able to filter the use cases and work out which are high risk and which are low risk, because you need a kind of a mental framework to do that before you can either prioritize. So we did it straight out of the gate. We got that right. The second thing we got right, as I said, was we pulled a group of people together from across the business and said, this is not just about IT, this is not just about kind of risk, it's not just about data protection, it's all of them together. And we moved at the speed of that group, right? So we wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable with where we ended up, and did it as a real cross-functional group across the business, and that really helped us. I think the third thing we said was, look, we're not putting in place a framework that's going to last for the next like 20 years. And I talk about an MVP framework. It's something that's good enough to get us going, to keep us safe, and to keep us kind of out of jail, as I joke. But this isn't something that we have to think has to stand the test of time for the next 20 years. And in fact, we've had it now for about a year and a half, and we're now looking at how do we evolve it, because we've learned some new stuff. We're adding some stuff into it. Some controls that we've put in there, we're kind of dialing back down now because we've got a lot more comfortable. So I think, don't think what you're going to put in place covers you forever. It just needs to be good enough for now. And then I think that the fourth thing we sort of got right was when we got our framework in place, we said, let's just take the high risk stuff off the table. Like, let's not even go there. So I was very clear at the beginning and saying, look, we're not going to do any use case with HR, nothing around that involves people or looking at CVs or all of that stuff that's in the high risk category. We had so many really valuable use cases that were at the low risk end of the spectrum. Let's just start there and take the high risk stuff off the table and say we're not going to do it. And again, that gave the organization the comfort that what we put in place was good enough for now to get us going.
Yeah, there were a couple of things there that that really resonated. The minimum viable governance approach, and having the right control framework based on the use cases that you have at that moment in time, it's a difficult one, right? Because sometimes the high risk ones have the biggest value, and they're so interwoven into the value chain of the business. I think just from personal experience, managing expectations in that regard is super important with senior stakeholders. And I think the final point you made around making sure that you go back and learn and reinforce the model and the framework is super important. And I no doubt suspect that the controls that you had 2 years ago were fit for purpose in
Yeah.
a slightly less automated instrumental way. Whereas now the technology has moved on so vastly, the way that you would have administered the control has changed as well. So there's lots of things there to think about how you use the capabilities within AWS to de-risk those things as well. So thank you for sharing that. Ahmed, I know obviously we touched on AWS and your broader experience, and the we, from a bedrock perspective, it's very much around bringing the model to the data, not the data to the model, right? And that's kind
Yeah,
of a
exactly.
premise that is super important. But can you just kind of give me some other examples of big, hairy, regulated businesses that are really maximizing their investments with AWS from a generative AI perspective?
Yeah, so many examples. So where I should start? Maybe I'll start with NatWest, because quite big brand here in UK, and they started their journey from 2023 even. And again, you think about it, it just, as Adrian as well, and like Adrian as well, who's leading that after, ChatGPT being released in November 2022. And I think this is really important. So NatWest, for people like me, just to get a sense of scale, they have more than 20 million customers and even more in the UK. And they've been using AI for long. And when GenAI being released, it was quite clear that they want to start to experiment and start to use it. And they don't want to have regulatory stop them. So they did what exactly Adrian just mentioned, where we can use it, where we can use it for good for customer without taking the risks. And then we can gradually build the trust, and you build this flywheel effect, right? So because you need to build this trust internally. So they started with personalization. So they use our machine learning platform for running like more than 100 models now that they're using it to accelerate their personalization with their customer, be more relevant to them, and also reducing fraud, which is quite interesting. And not specifically for NatWest, but this is even way common use case that we see many of FSI customer using it, that they use their traditional ML models that they're using for fraud, they augment that with generative AI to increase the accuracy. So we are not talking about like you need to drop whatever you did as an investment. They build on top of it. So that was really interesting working with NatWest. Another example is LexisNexis, for example, where they are like a global legal providers and they deal with massive number of documents. When they started that, I remember that it's a public as well, a YouTube video, I can send it to everyone. They was talking about, in average, they need to process, but they measured 300,000 legal documents, which could take them 6 months. This has been reduced only to 6 weeks with a better accuracy by around 20%, even when they use GenAI of it. And the last example I will mention, which is I think is fascinating when you think about generative AI and AI in general, is life science and healthcare. So AstraZeneca, they actually been using also generative AI specifically for R&D, and they scale it in less than 6 months, more than thousands of people internally, and they actually reduce massively. I don't have the numbers, but reduce massively the time that they to do those researches from months to actually minutes, which is again fascinating, and it's very important when address things like pandemic, cancer, cure, and all that stuff. So across the three example, FSI and legal and healthcare, I just hope to give a feeling that it's going everywhere. And many customers using. Maybe it's not everyone is vocal about it, but I would say almost everyone is exploring it and using it.
No, perfect. And I think for the three very distinct industry examples you provided, that even if we just consider the sensitivity and the classification of the data that is flowing through those businesses, they are the very kind of atypical example of a highly regulated business, right? So thank you for
Very.
sharing those. Thank you for sharing those ones with us. So look, we've kind of talked about architecture, we've talked about the frameworks and how we structure those controls in a kind of people process technology way. But Adrian, you've been on the front line, right? You've been in hairy sessions and conversations with stakeholders about the risks of these systems that you're building. Could you maybe just give me a sense of the method and the approach that you use to classify the risk of an AI system, and maybe some of the practical expertise that you learned through your prioritization process?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the first thing that we've learned is really to sort of get all of the key stakeholders around the table and spend a lot of time to really peel back what is the risk, right? I think everyone sort of comes into those discussions, and certainly at the beginning when we were doing it kind of 2 years ago, very heightened to what the risk is, very concerned about the threat that it's going to have to the company or impact on the EU AI Act and fines and what have you. So you start in a very kind of high risk environment, but we spend a lot of time kind of really trying to peel back and trying to work out what's the new risk. right? What's actually the new risk from the new bit of technology that we're deploying? Because you end up, actually what we found was when you peel back the layers of the onion, a lot of things people are worried about, either we have those risks today because somebody is doing that, if we're kind of automating something, somebody is doing that job today. Anything which has a person involved, there's a degree of risk, right? So what we spent a lot of time doing was working out what's the risk that we have today, how do we manage that risk today? So what's the governance, or what's the framework, or what's the control mechanism that we already have today? Can we just apply that control in the new world? Does it work? Often it did, right? We already had data protection rules, and we had sort of cybersecurity requirements that we could just flow onto the solution that we were looking at. And let's really hone down onto what's new, what's the new risk. And quite often we realized it only really came down to a couple of things, essentially around hallucination. So how do you know the output that you're getting from the model? Can you rely on it? How do you know how it's come up with the answer? That's clearly a kind of a new risk that you need to manage. And the other is around IP protection. And if it generates something new, what happens with the IP? And often every other risk was already there, or we'd found a way to manage it. So then what we did was we said, okay, in each of these use cases, let's look at those particular issues, which we think are the unique ones, IP protection and hallucinations, and have we got a way to manage those two new risks? And that's, I'd say, generally how we categorized our use cases, in where it's a low risk case for both of those two areas, because everything else we're kind of managing already with existing frameworks, I'd say.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? And I think every other organization, if I go back in time 2.5 years ago, there was a lot of furore around, do we need to administer changes to our existing risk and control framework? And I think as organizations started to get more familiar with the attack vectors and the risk vectors that existed in their business today, they actually realized that AI didn't necessarily exacerbate that in any greater detail. The interesting point, I think I just wanted to close off on the loop that you mentioned. So MIT has an AI risk register, and that risk register contains the novel AI risks. And I think that you were kind of alluding to the hallucinations and the IP examples in the generative realm. Is what are the actual novel AI risks that are indicative to our business? And that's a really helpful resource to help organizations of all shapes and sizes try to understand those risks in their business. So thank you for sharing that. Ahmed, if I could kind of turn to yourself, as Adrian alluded to, not all AI opportunities carry the same risk. And I'd be really curious about how AWS balances this kind of conundrum with your customers, right? What advice do you give to organizations to govern their agents, LLMs, Bedrock adoption journeys? And how do you kind of balance that control, rigor, speed, and innovation, which when you think about the AWS DNA, it is about let's go fast and build some really cool technology.
Yeah, agree. But in the same time, also in Amazon and we have what we call work backward mechanism. And I just remember a very interesting discussion that Jeff Bezos, maybe 6-7 years ago, maybe older than that, someone asked him about like, work backward mechanism is really hard. Can we find a workaround about that? And for people who doesn't know what's work backward mean, it means that you actually look for a business problem and you work backwards from this, keeping a customer on top of mind while you're addressing this one. So, and I always say, like, you need to fall in love with the problem more than the technology itself. So that's the key things. Yes, we talked about that you need to maybe you could start with a less risky situation, but this doesn't mean that you take a use case that doesn't have an impact, right? So we need to have this right balance, and we really in those work backward session that we do with our customer to tell them how we do it even internally in Amazon. We are not claiming this is the best mechanism, but it worked for us. So that's why we share it with people. So in this working backward session, we said we think, we write it down, we write what we call press release, frequently asking questions, all mechanisms. And we really, you would be surprised that we push back a lot on if this is the right use case, is what's the business impact, and everyone have to give their input. And also we advise the customer, go and find your security people, find your head of risk and compliance, and discuss with them even before putting a single line of code, right? So this is all we try to do at the beginning. And then within the session, we put this use cases in a simple mental model, like x-axis and y-axis. So you get on your y-axis, let's say the feasibility of building this in terms of where is your data, your skills, and all that stuff. And x-axis is the business impact. And then we put all the use cases after all this discussion. And the one that's set on the top right-hand corner, that's the one that we start with, which is have feasibility and have more business impact. Again, it doesn't mean that it's the easiest one. Feasibility means like, okay, it's met our risk. We have the data, we have the skills, we have the right partners. Let's say we have WeBuild-AI, healthcare or whatever, right? So this is, and we start from this. This is how we do it. But look, at end of day, we are innovating, right? So when you innovate, you need to keep in mind that you could fail. So you need to be aware about this risk and embrace it, and you move from there. The idea is like how I can fail fast so I can move forward. That's also we kind of packages with what we advise on our customer with.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. I think the old Facebook mantra of fail fast and break things is just not relevant in today's world. And I think Facebook actually changed their mantra to move fast and don't break stuff, which when we think about the world of AI is just super important. I think there's some really valuable insights there. So thank you for sharing those. The it would be remiss of me, given that it's the nearly the end of the year and we're fast approaching the end of 2025, to ask about some predictions and some looking forward lensed questions into 2026. And then we'll open up for some questions from those on the call. I think, Adrian, if I could start with yourself, how do you think your AI governance approach is going to evolve in the next 12 to 18 months, based on what you found in the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so maybe a couple of sort of thoughts. So the first is we'll definitely continue to evolve it. So I mentioned, so one example is right at the beginning when we started a year and a half ago, we said no confidential information in it at all. We're now sort of finding a way to allow our people to use confidential information. So that's a change that we're about to make to the guidance. We'll have to evolve it as the environment changes, right? So we operate across 36 countries. The EUA Act is good for a lot of those. Obviously, we're in the UK, so we're going to have to keep a handle on how the regulatory environment changes and update it. And then the third thing we've got to look at is what we're now working on in DS Smith is agentic, and looking at an agentic platform and deploying AI agentic systems into the house to automate some stuff. I think that opens up a whole new kind of way to think about our governance framework when it's getting into decision making. So that's probably the next piece of work that we'll have to do as a group to get to the next MVP framework, version 2 of our governance framework, to take into account agentic platforms for us.
No, that's and I look, if we think about where you were 2 years ago to where you are today, um, there's a lot that you could do on the front end of governance, right, to stop the thing getting into the system. But when we think about agents, that brings a whole other conundrum around runtime governance
Yeah.
and near real time insight of an agent almost operating, as you said, like a human to a
Yeah.
certain extent, right? And unfortunately, we can't watch what everybody does in an organization every day. But when we think about AI and agents, we seem to have this notion that we have to have that. So that telemetry piece is going to be super, super important. Ahmed, I know that in the last few days, I think I read something that AWS has been listed as a critical third-party provider as a proxy to the recent DORA legislation. So that's the Digital Operational Resilience Act for anybody that is not familiar with that. But I was just curious, when you put your AWS hat on, what do you see from an EU AI Act perspective for AWS? And are there anything um, or are there any items that you're building into the kind of technology capabilities to help organizations with that kind of compliance conundrum?
Yeah, I will address this, but before this, just want a quick double click what Adrian mentioned, because I think it's very important when he talk about agents. So, and it's actually related also to the compliance. I mean, if you think about agent now, this is completely different from the way that we used to deal with infrastructure and system and internet at all, right? So usually when you try, let's say, to list your, I don't know, a product on a certain website, or you list, or you log into your bank account, your credential is being encrypted and is being, your identity is being sent to this website and get you access. So that's you. You are the one who's doing that. Now we have agents that do it in your behalf. And that's completely different thing. So what we did in AWS, which I think is very fascinating, is now it's changing how identities looks like. We have something called Agent Core, which is part of Bedrock. And within Agent Core, there is a component called Agent Core Identity. And by the way, you can use Agent Core Identity even if you're not using AWS Bedrock, or even if you're not using any model from us. So let's say you're hosting in another cloud provider, or Blue Guys, or the multicolor guys, or whatever those cloud providers, or even using ChatGPT directly. And then you can still use our own identity to secure that. But what this is, the idea is we generate an identity for the agent. So there is agent that do function. But when Adrian requests this agent, and when you, Ben, request this agent, on the fly, we generate two different instances because each one need to run securely. And then the Adrian agent will carry his identity, and your agent will carry your identity. But those agents within AWS Agent Core, we generate for them identity also, because we need to track that. Otherwise, it will be looks like that Adrian is the one who did it, and you's the one who did it, and we don't do that anymore now. We have now identity, and the token that we generate with Agent Core, it's actually looks like a coin that had two sides. A side is your identity, and a side of the agent itself. So you come to the platform, we authenticate you, we take your identity, first find do you have a permission to use this agent or not. We link your identity with the agent identity, and we go and execute the action. So we know that you did this through the agent, or the agent did it, it's not you. And also the platform that we are communicating with, no, that's an agent is coming, it's not you. And that's really, really different. And if you're not using this, if you're not doing it this now, I forget even about AWS, you need to find the framework to do it to you. And we're happy to support, but if you're not doing, you must do it. Otherwise, will be a big issue with the compliance, which you are talking about now, the AI Act. So the AI Act, so we are one of the early people who signed on the AI Act long when it started. And if you look about what's coming from AI Act, things like ISO 42001, services like Bedrock, Amazon Q, SageMaker, and all they are certified for this service. So we are trying to comply with that. That's the first thing. The other thing about which you bring it at the beginning of the call, which is transparency. we have something called AWS AI Service Card that explain the models that we have and what's the use case that you should use model for. And then we have logs and audit that you can use. The third component that we give you tools like guardrails. We already implemented guardrails, but also you need to add your own compliance on top of it and guardrails to do it. So that's the third component. So again, first is complying with ISO as part of the EU AI Act. Second, the service card. Third is resignation guardrail. The fourth component is training, because people need to be trained about that. People need to know what I just mentioned about agent. People doesn't think about this. So we are having a platform that we are offer training for people. Most of it is free as well, that they can use, which I think it's very important. So between these four components, we believe that we can help our customer to start to get ready, because we almost like what, a month now, or even less, to 2026. And then we have a detailed blog post. I don't know if I put it on a chat, will be available for everyone, but we can put this link and people can go through it to see how AWS can help them with EU AI Act.
Super, thank you. The interlude you gave about agents was fascinating, and the whole notion of the agent almost operating like a digital twin of yourself is really interesting, right? And when you think about giving agency to a system to do the thing on your behalf, you're almost giving it like a delegation of authority, like you would an employee, and that sort of approval chain is really important from an auditability perspective. So that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. We are very close to running out of time, and we've covered so much ground in the duration of the presentation. I'm going to give you both two questions that have come through on the call since we've been talking. And Adrian, if I could pick one of them for you, which is in the risk and legal perspective. So one of the questions I had for you is compliance and risk people. Hopefully there's some on this call, but they often get a bad rap, and often get challenges from people that they're putting up blockers and roadblocks to not get things done. I was just really curious when you kind of put your AWS experience, sorry, your DS Smith experience into this, what worked for you with the legal and risk team
Yeah.
when you were trying to get them on point?
Yeah. So a couple of things. The first is, like I always say to my team, like those people are trying to help us. Like I know it comes across sometimes that they're trying to block, but they're always trying to do things for the right reason to keep the company safe. And you have to go into a discussion with them, understanding their framing, which is keep the company safe, right? Which is what we all want to do as well. So you have to sort of go into the discussions with them, seeing it from their point of view, which is how do we go fast? And actually, if we get the right guidance, that's how we go fast, right? With the right guidance in place. So go in with the right mindset, try and really understand their concerns. What are they worried about? Because they'll have absolutely the right worries. They're worrying about the right things. So it's don't focus on the worry, focus on how do you fix the worry and get them comfortable with the worry, or rather comfortable with the solution that fixes the worry. And then I think the third thing that we did, which was we actually then we found some use cases which were relevant for legal, right? And said, look, if we can get this right framework in place, one of the headaches that you've got, how do you go through all of these contracts, for example, we can help you fix that with AI. So that almost gave them a bit of an incentive to get the right framework in place quickly, because once we had the right framework, they were going to be one of the first use cases that we helped. And that gave them a bit of an incentive to get it over the line in the right way. But you just got to go in with the right mindset, because they're trying to do the right thing for the company, and you've got to meet in the middle.
Yeah, there's also nothing quite like taking a splinter out of somebody's hand and helping them with something that's been giving them some headache for some time. So thank you for sharing that. And then Ahmed, I've got a question specifically from one of the attendees. So the question is, we're a mid-sized financial services company with limited resources. Should we build governance frameworks in-house or use solutions provided through things like AWS Bedrock? And they've then said, what's the trade-off? So it's quite a detailed one for you, but hopefully you can give them a good riposte, and we'll be good.
Yeah, I think we ran out of time, so I'll do it quick. But so the answer, it depends, right? And anyone working consultants know when you say that it depends, it means that I don't know the answer. So, so no, but actually it depends on the use case. Like even if they are a mid-size, and even if the big guys, like in talk from the level of NatWest or whatever, it depends on the use cases. So some of you can just say like, it's there, fit my need, let's go and implement it, let's use what's available there. And then if you cannot do that, just work with us, with your partners here to find the level of customization that you need to do. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. We understand that every customer is different, but there is a lot of things that's very common. You know, chatbot, right? You know, been doing chatbot with generative AI for the last 3 years, right? So we have a lot of guidance and governance that we can apply. So use that. 95% will be covered. 5% will help you to customize it.
Yeah. That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, we were tight on time. And you would also make a very good consultant with your it depends response. So thank you for answering that question. So look, as we move into the final furlong, I wanted to say thank you to Adrian and Ahmed for participating in today's panel. I think there's some really sage guidance and advice that they've both been able to provide, both from Adrian's experience at DS Smith and Ahmed's experience much broader with other customers across the AWS ecosystem. So thank you both for taking part. It's really appreciated on our side. In terms of the things that we've covered and the opportunity around innovation and governance, yes, when we do innovate, speed to market is absolutely critical. But when you innovate, that needs to be performed in a sustainable way, both from a jackhammer that the business can only take so much innovation in terms of its muscle memory and readiness and its preparedness to accept change in such an accelerated way, but also your customers. So yes, market differentiation is super important and you want to stand out in a very crowded marketplace. But the thing sometimes that differentiates you is responsibility, is trust, is reliability. And sometimes those are the things that a lot of customers look for in the products and services that they acquire across their litany of solutions in the marketplace. But I think the final point to just touch on is confidence and breeding confidence into your stakeholders at every level of the business. Adrian shared some really good examples of his expertise of navigating the conundrum of the legal and the risk team. But obviously, you have material risk takers of all shapes and sizes who do not want to go to jail, as Adrian also said. So being able to provide an explainable and auditable story of the use cases, the data, the business processes, and the potential risk, but making that consumable is really important because dare I say, the last thing anybody wants is a 50-page risk document. So we've got to tailor the information in the right way for the audience that we are talking to through that change agenda. So remains to be said, thank you for today's session. If you are interested in the items that we have covered, there are a whole realm of areas that we can assist you with here at WeBuild-AI, particularly in the data and AI governance space, but fundamentally building that into the digital products and services that you build and the operating models and the ways of working for your organization to scale AI safely, securely, and ethically in the enterprise. If you did enjoy today's session, feel free to get in touch with myself, Ahmed, or Adrian, and you can get in touch with us via email or LinkedIn so we can pick up on those questions for you separately at a later date. Thank you very much, Ahmed. Thank you very much, Adrian. And thank you very much to our audience for joining today's session. Have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you, Ben, again.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. Cheers.